The purpose of the Global CFO Council is to provide an educational and networking forum for senior financial executives in order to share best practices, discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their jobs. Membership is open to senior financial executives including CFOs, financial VPs, and treasurers. We hope that you'll become a member of the Global CFO Council today. To join, please visit the membership tab at globalcfocouncil.com.
David Barnett, I am super excited. I'm so excited about your remote presentation. I'm working remote. Bam. I am in Oregon. I'm about 500 feet from Mount Hood. That's a beautiful mountain behind you, the virtual mountain. Where are you at today?
I'm in Colorado near Pikes Peak. That is Pikes Peak, but I'm actually in my office. So that's a picture of Pikes Peak, which is actually that way, just not too far.
Well, nice. David Barnett, I don't read bios. I try to find a little bit of information on the internet about the speakers. And I found something. So, accountant by day, you are a NetAlly corporate controller and HR manager, I think. Is that true?
That's true.
Do you get paid twice?
I wish.
You're in HR and accounting, no separation of duties. You should be able to pull that off. And undergraduate, University of Wisconsin, I think Whitewater campus, and an MBA, North Central University. Is that correct?
Part of an MBA. I started it.
Oh, you got to finish, brother. Oh, almost. You'll get there. Certified public accountant and a CMA. Pretty impressive. And I think some personal stuff I think I know about you. Looks like married, maybe 3, 4 kids, something like that.
I have 5. My wife has 2.
Whoa, advanced leadership there with 5 children. And something super cool, I hope is true. Are you a martial arts instructor, black belt in Taekwondo and Karate?
I am, and I have a nonprofit that teaches to low-income school children as well.
David, I saw online that you were running a Kickstarter campaign for that program. Is that still going on?
I could always use donations. I think I might have closed the Kickstarter, but if anybody can reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'll tell you where to send the check.
All right.
We are an official nonprofit organization, so it's tax deductible.
David, send me a link. I'll shoot it out when I send out to all. And if anybody makes a donation, the CFO Council will match it. So let me know after I send the link, whatever you get, and we'll match that. What a great organization and super cool. So anybody asks any difficult questions, there's karate chops coming your way.
Just virtual slaps. That's right.
Well, David, I'm super excited. I'm going to mute myself, and I'll hit you with some questions halfway through.
All right, great. Thank you. Well, I'll bet most of us are probably working remote. I came into the office today because when I work remote, my dogs are usually right behind me, and who knows what kind of noises they're going to make. But, a couple of years ago, we were all working in our offices together at the same place, maybe working from home occasionally, but then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, everybody got sent home. And 2.5 years later, some of us are working remotely. There's a lot of hybrid situations, but companies are still trying to figure that out. So I'm going to go through the first parts of my slides very quickly. I think most people will probably agree with the reasons that remote or a hybrid situation is a good thing. But feel free to ask questions. We've got a couple of Q&A times, but we are going to be sending out the slide deck, so you can go through this in more detail. Just some things in the news, and I just updated this yesterday or the day before. Job openings are twice as high as the pre-pandemic norm. Even though U.S. employers have added 372,000 jobs in June, the job openings outnumbered unemployed workers by $5.5 million in June. There were 12 months in a row ending in June where over 4 million people left their jobs, presumably for other jobs. That's 3% of the workforce per month. So just imagine if 3% of your employees quit every month, what kind of situation that would look like for you. It's a job seekers market. Companies are having to pay more for employees. I don't know how many people on this call have tried to hire a finance person in the last year, but it's very, very hard. And I just read some new information yesterday. This is from the Corporate Finance Brief. They said they did a study. 31% of professional employees and office workers plan to quit in the next 6 months. And 94% of workers who left their companies in the past year do not regret it. So it's kind of a scary time for us as employers out there. And at the same time, a lot of companies are planning a return to office and trying to bring people back into the office and seeing very mixed results. So we're just going to talk about some advantages and disadvantages, some strategies, challenges on remote work, which I'm sure a lot of us are feeling, and then how to make that successful. So who wants workers to return to the office? It's not employees. It's a lot of old school people. Hey, this is the way we've always done it. They love coming into the office. And here's a big one we'll talk about in a little bit, is people who don't trust their employees. Now, who wants remote work? Well, this guy does. I've got 2 dogs at home. They love it when I'm at home. They're by my feet or they're by my wife's feet down in her office. But employees want to work remotely. There's a lot of different statistics. You guys can see those, but one study had 97% of their respondents said they either wanted to be full-time remote or hybrid. 82% of employees prefer working from home. 64% of employees in one study said they're more productive at home and feel less stressed. We recently did another employee survey of our employees, and almost half of our employees cited the flexible work from home policy that we have now as one of the major things they like about working for us. And there were a couple that even said, if we return to the office full-time, they would look for another job. So what's happening to the employee experience? For decades, we've been talking about the employee experience and company culture and retention. This website, futureforum.com, has a survey that they update very regularly, at least quarterly, sometimes monthly. And you can see some of these slides in the end of the presentation. There's a bunch of extra slides I added that you can view later, but you can check out this. But in a nutshell, the inflexible return to office policies are just hammering employee experience scores. Return to office policies are negatively impacting those scores. Full-time office workers have the steepest declines, followed by hybrid, followed by full-time remote. There seems to be a double standard for the C-suite, who happen to be the people that are in the office the least anyway. And then those inflexible policies may be driving attrition, especially among underrepresented groups. So here's what we've learned from COVID. We can work successfully, we can achieve our work goals, we can balance our work and personal lives, and physical presence in the office is not necessary to produce great results. I can see a few of you on camera, and yeah, you're getting some good education sitting at home right now. So for the last 5 decades, we've talked about this thing called work-life balance, where our personal and professional responsibilities were separate and competed directly for our time. But kind of the new thing is work-life integration, and that's blending our personal and professional lives, creating synergies between the two, from work to family to community to our personal well-being. And instead of rigidly determined work time and personal time, we focus instead on what is the best time for those activities. So maybe some of you are struggling to get your company to buy into remote work still, or maybe some of you aren't sure if it's really a good thing or how to about it. So we're just going to very quickly go through some of the advantages of remote work. From the company's point of view, like I said, if anybody's tried to hire for an open position in finance, it is really hard. By allowing remote work, we're able to attract more people and retain more people. There's a diversified talent pool out there, career mobility. I've known several companies who lost employees because they were requiring them to relocate for a promotion. We can accommodate special needs like family situations, maybe a loved one at home that needs care for. And when we were placing one of our accounting positions, our top candidate turned us down because he said he wants fully remote, or at least mostly remote. And at the time, which we've since changed, we were requiring 3 days a week in office. We have access to more potential employees. We hired an HR person, so I'm not the only one anymore in HR, but we actually hired an HR person for our company. And when we were doing that, we had 150 employees or 150 applicants on LinkedIn for that position. But then we decided that needed to be a local person. That took us down to 2 employees. And we got lucky, and my top candidate happened to be from Colorado Springs. But it's very, very hard, and allowing remote gives us access to a lot more employees. If employees have to relocate, maybe a spouse had to move for their job, or maybe a military spouse for family reasons, we can keep those employees and saying, well, you can't work here anymore if you move. And then people who maybe are working parents that need some type of flexibility to deal with their kids. There's a positive impact on DE&I, a more diverse workforce, as we've talked about. It can remove commuting issues and workplace issues for people with disabilities that maybe can't commute as easily as some of us. It also reduces discrimination anywhere from the hiring process to communications. There's a lot of advantages for the company, as I'm sure you realize. Office and rent is a big expense for most companies. My daughter-in-law's company during COVID sent everybody home. They worked from home. When their lease came up, they decided to go fully remote, didn't renew their lease, and save that money. I know Robert has been able to significantly downsize his corporate space, and I think he said he saved billions of dollars or something like that. No, not billions, but he saved a lot of money. There's lower recruiting costs, lower training costs because you don't have to have people travel somewhere for training, and you can record things like new employee trainings and then issue those out to your employees without spending people's time one-on-one. There's less relocation costs because you're not relocating people anymore. And if people are happy and healthier, costs go down. There's fewer sick people in the office spreading their sickness, and there's fewer workplace accidents. I won't read this slide to you, but there's a lot of statistics from major companies saying that their teleworkers are more productive than their people working in the office. So commute time, a lot of time that we used to spend commuting, we're now spending either working or maybe even better self-care. One company's experience says that employees spend 60% of the commuting time they save now performing work. There's fewer unscheduled absences and less sick time. A lot of people who call in sick really aren't. And then remote employees tend to work when they're not sick, which is not necessarily a good thing, but then they're not coming into work and exposing others. I know I had COVID back in January, and I had basically 2 full days off. And then the rest of the time I didn't feel great, but I wasn't going to come into the office, but I was able to work and still stay on top of things without using up sick time. There's fewer business interruptions like disasters and outages and weather. I've been at companies years ago that if there was a major snowstorm, nobody could come into the office, nobody got any work done. Now that doesn't affect things anymore. Or we had one company, we had a major water leak in the basement and we were unable to work in the building for a week. Everybody, it was a major office building, so every company in there basically had to shut down for a week. Might have better customer service because there's people in other parts of the country or the world now that can all serve that and expand our customer service hour. And of course, happier and more engaged employees means better service to customers. Now, there's a lot of advantages for the employee, like increased job satisfaction, more flexibility because we have more control over when, where, and how our work gets done. We can be involved in school, community, and family events, maybe take 2 hours off during the day to go do that and flex our time instead of taking a half day or a full day of vacation to go and attend an event at a school. There's cost savings. All of us have probably felt the gas prices hit us pretty hard, but everything from commuting, parking, the cost of running your vehicles, clothes, food. We don't even have to wear pants for these webinars anymore. You don't know if I'm wearing pants. I don't have to buy new clothes all the time. Childcare, and we are going to talk about, remote work doesn't mean it's a substitute for necessary childcare. And cost of living. We've had a lot of people have moved to different areas. Colorado's a big one. A lot of people have moved from California because the cost of living is cheaper and their money goes farther there. And then commuting. I don't know about you guys. I do not like commuting. I don't like traffic. I think most other drivers are bad drivers. And I just much prefer commuting from my bedroom or kitchen into my office instead of driving into work. There's lower anxiety and healthier habits. People are tending to work out more, take walking breaks, and eat healthier. There's a lot better work-life balance, increased productivity. We can take breaks. There's fewer interruptions. Everybody I've talked to that works from home really mentioned that there's less interruptions during their day, less travel time, and not just commuting, but traveling for business meetings. Sales teams are able to interact with more customers. And I'm not saying that face-to-face meetings aren't important because they are, especially in sales, which is a very relational, but it does save a lot of time. And, statistically, businesses lose $600 billion a year in workplace distractions. And another benefit is fewer work and family conflicts. Hey, you're always at the office. Now that can also backfire because, hey, you're at home, but you're also always at work. There's some advantages for the community environment as well. We can provide opportunities for at-home caregivers, disabled people that maybe can't travel to a traditional office. There's military spouses, as we talked about. If somebody moves around a lot because of their spouse's job, they can continue to work at the same job. We have less commuting time. There's less fuel consumption, which is cheaper for us as consumers, but also better for the environment. Reduced impact on infrastructure. Less traffic means less accidents. There's less energy use and less paper use in a remote office. But there are some disadvantages, and we'll cover some of these and some of the challenges. Face-to-face interaction is difficult. We have to make the effort. It has to be intentional. And the reality is some communication is better in person, and we need to determine what those types of things are. Bad employees might be able to get away with poor performance, and we'll talk about how to manage that. Leadership and soft skills might be harder to gauge, and then we'll talk about some location-based challenges in a few minutes. So for the most part, today's models were not really well thought out, organized, and planned. Most of us just kind of got thrown into it when COVID hit. We tried to figure things out, but if we want to do it right, we really need to think it through. So here are some things to consider. When we're talking about either a fully remote or a hybrid situation, if you're already in that, it's not too late to go back and look at some of those things. How many days do we need people to come into the office? And is it consistent? Are we offering flexibility? Does everybody in the company need to come in on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, or does it depend on the job? Who needs to come in the office? And I really firmly believe that in-office needs to be based on business need, not to proximity to an office. So, oh, you work or you live 2 hours away or another state away, you obviously don't have to come into the office, but you work within a half hour, well, you need to come into the office. So why do we need to come into the office? It needs to be based on the business need. There's some work that might be better done in person, like creative things, collaboration. In marketing and engineering, maybe there's more of a need to have face-to-face interactions. How will meetings work best? Do some need to be in person? Do some need to be virtual? Can they all be virtual? What tools should we use for meetings? One of the things in our employee surveys, a lot of people said now that we're traveling again, even though we like the remote work, it would be nice if once in a while we could all get together in person. There's a couple of key things here too. How can influence be balanced between those who work on-site versus off-site? And there's this new buzzword that's come out fairly recently called proximity bias. And that's basically a bias that if you're in the office interacting with, say, the CEO or the CFO or the people that are making the decisions, is that giving you an advantage over somebody who's working remotely? It's possible that more people in the office that are together are getting more face time and are more likely to maybe get raises or avoid a layoff. So it's important in remote work that we're aware of that. And then how can you create a system that equally values and rewards those people working in the office the same as those who are working remotely? So in-person employees and remote workers need to have similar benefits, opportunities, and promotions, for example. Should teams physically gather in a single place while tackling a project? If so, how often does that need to happen? And can we make sure that our communication to offsite workers is just as effective as it is with those in the office? So we're going to see if there's any questions so far before we jump into some of the more details about some of the challenges. Robert?
Hey, David. First of all, I am amazingly impressed you got through that many slides that fast. You are amazing. Question number one is, you mentioned collaboration. Any best practices around that, how to recreate that casual collaboration, that water cooler talk, that pop in, hey, how you doing?
It's a great question. So on a limited basis, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but like we have team meetings. I have team meetings every week. And I think team meetings shouldn't be just a, hey, what's everybody working on right now? It should be more interactive and team building. We always do some type of introductory question or some type of icebreaker. Sometimes they're a little more in depth. We've had people send us all a picture of a vacation they recently took, and then we let them talk about that just to get to know each other. We'll say, what movies are you watching, or what are your favorite things on Netflix right now? Things like that. So that's important. If you do have team meetings, there are different ways and platforms that you can use to help that collaboration and team building. And there's a lot of collaboration tools out there. There's virtual whiteboards, and there's different things like WebEx and Appreciate Social and Teams and things like that help that. So hopefully we'll get into a little more in depth with a few of those in a little bit.
And maybe this is a question that you'll pick up in the second part of the presentation, but there was a couple questions around any recommendations on tools for those jobs that do require a higher level of collaboration, technical or creative jobs. Any suggestions on tools, any emerging collaboration tools that you've heard of?
Yeah, I'll talk about one of them in a few minutes. We'll get to that real quick, but there's a lot of tools out there. I'm not an expert on that. I know our marketing team uses some that I don't personally use, but like I said, there's like virtual whiteboards that you can use where everybody can contribute, just like they'd walk up to a whiteboard in a conference room or something like that. So that's a great question. I don't have some great answers, but a quick Google search will give that to you. And there's a lot of them out there. So check the reviews as well.
David, when we talk about that the decision of in-office or remote, hybrid, flex should be business-based, task-based. We need to be mature, scientific about this. Any thoughts on jobs? So it's not proximity. It isn't that you're 30 minutes away from the office, because I would move 32 minutes away. What about position specific? Are there, I mean, obviously, if you make widgets and the widget making machine is in Kansas, you got to live near the widget making machine. But any thoughts on those creative or technical jobs, engineering, STEM jobs maybe, that are surprisingly more in office or maybe surprisingly more remote? What are your thoughts on job specific as it relates to this topic?
Yeah, so for an example, we make hardware network testing devices as well as software. So we have a pretty, not a huge group, but we've got a number of people that are all based out of Colorado Springs that are hardware and software engineers. And they do a lot of collaboration when I'm in the office, which isn't that often, but when I'm in the office, I see them at each other's desk all the time, working on things together. Now, you can do some of those things, sharing screens, like we are now, and things like that. But sometimes it's better to be, in a room together. Our marketing people said, hey, there's a big energy when we all get in the room together. We don't need to do that all the time, but we need to do that a few times a year to kind of bounce those ideas back. So it really depends. I can tell a quick story. When we were working on budgets at a place I worked, there were a bunch of us. There's a CEO, the CFO, myself, another guy who was actually in another state. And we're all on our own laptops in an office together, all staring at our own screens. So I could have been sitting on a beach chair staring at my screen. I didn't need to be across the table from somebody staring at their screen. So there really has to be some intentionality to that, and really decide what's best for for each position.
David, any thoughts about what I'll call wage arbitrage, or between, if you open up to recruiting people all over the country and people can work remote, any thoughts on companies that are using that as like a cost advantage, looking at, or the use of consultants and 1099 employees all over, opening up the aperture, if you will? Anybody, any emerging thoughts on that?
I've seen some things that talk about there's kind of a trend to level setting salaries, not by area. So if I go to work in Silicon Valley and I'm making, say, 50% more than I make here, then I move, does a company have a right to reduce my salary based on the cost of living of where I go? By the same token, if I live, in a lower cost area, I'm not going to move to a higher cost area to take a job, without a significant increase in salary. So I have seen some talk about level setting. That's kind of a tricky one, and it's probably really beyond this webinar, but I've started to read more information about it. There's probably some webinars out there on that subject. That's a good question. The important thing, though, is things like equality, is salaries need to be based on the job and maybe the location, if that's a necessity, and not necessarily, how much did you make before? We'll give you a little bit more than that.
David, what about, we've probably all taken the same CPE session that got us paranoid about people moving around, and now we have workers all over. Sometimes I don't even know where they're at. They're in a van down by a river. And our obligations with tax, state tax, business tax. I know we can't cover this in 60 seconds, but your thoughts on the complexity of having people all over and very fluidly all over.
Yeah, I have a slide on that. That's one of those location problems now, because we've had people during COVID that moved away from the office that used to come in the office and now live in different states. So we use a PEO. We don't do our own payroll in-house. So they handle that for us. And we also, I think we have 12 or 13 states and 7 different countries. So we use other companies that handle that for us. Whenever we have an employee that goes to a different company, we reach out to our legal team and say, hey, we need to make sure we're registering in this. But there are definitely some considerations. And if you don't have experts in your company or a company that does that for you, that's definitely something you want to get some legal advice on.
David, and you may cover this, but if not, speak to, you talked about real estate decisions, office design, locations. What are your thoughts on that going? How should we be thinking about that in the future of work?
Yeah, we are going to talk about that. The one thing I'll say is there's kind of an argument for, well, we're paying for the space. We just signed a new lease. Why don't we use it? And, I think we're all financial professionals here. We all understand the sunk cost principle. Just because you're paying for something doesn't mean you have to keep using it if it doesn't make sense to do that.
Last question for our halfway point is, have you seen any research around specifically the effectiveness of live in-person meetings versus remote? Any data on or guidance around, hey, in this situation, that's when you got to rally everybody together physically in person versus, hey, given this set of data points, it's best to be, or you could be remote?
Yeah, I think it depends again on the job, like marketing people, maybe where you're trying to collaborate on something, it can be helpful to be in the room. Like I said, there's a lot of good tools out there for that. We had a new employee that started in accounting not too long ago. And, I was realizing very quickly, he was local, but we were working remotely for the most part. And I was realizing very quickly, it didn't seem like he was really grasping things the way I expected. So we started coming into the office together so we could do our training together in real time. So there are times you may need to do that. And again, it depends on the job. Salespeople, sometimes it is good for them to go and talk to a potential customer or an existing customer.
And I'm going to pull the string one more on that, and then I'm going to mute myself. Is you and I are both passionate about remote and flex and hybrid, and that's the future of work. But there is a time to come in the office, like you said, data based, and it's some frequency, more than 0. But we have employees who want it to be 0, that never want to see another person again. I've got some introverts who never want to see another human again. So how do you, if you and I think, okay, the data says it's once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whatever it is, how do you convince the team it isn't 0?
That's a great question. I think it really, if you could say to that one employee on your team of 5 or whatever, hey, we would really like you to come in, every quarter so that we can all get together and do some social things so that we can learn more about each other and get to know each other and be able to work better together instead of working in our silos. Kind of depends on what that person's doing. If they can convince me that they're doing just as great a job and they never need to see me, but their work's getting done, great. I was on a webinar last week, and it was another on kind of remote stuff. And they asked the question, they said, compared to before COVID, are you closing the books faster, the same, or is it taking longer? And it was like 90% said about the same. A couple people said a little faster, a couple people said a little slower, but basically our job was the same whether we're in the office together or not. And again, it kind of depends on the job. In finance, I spend most of my time staring at a computer screen. That might be different for somebody in marketing or sales or even engineering.
Fantastic. I've got a bunch more questions I'm going to hold to the end and then hit you rapid fire at the end.
Great. Okay, so let's just real quick talk about some of the challenges. And if you think of others, feel free to bring them up at Q&A, and we'll cover some of the ones that people asked about here. I think management mistrust is one of the biggest reasons that a lot of executives want people to come back to the office. One study I read said 75% of managers say they trust their employees, but a third said they still want to see them in the office just to be sure. And I've heard from many executives and managers, well, how do they know they're working? And my semi-sarcastic answer is, well, how do we know you're managing? If you hire and retain the right employees, that's really the key. And if someone wasn't doing a good job in the office, they're probably not going to do a good job remote. And if they're not doing a good job remote, they're probably not going to be a better employee in the office. The real key is having clear goals and objectives. And a lot of this stuff I'm talking about isn't just remote work. We should have been doing this all along anyway. And if we're not good at it yet, we really need to get better at it during remote work. Every job and every employee should have a purpose and a goal and targets, and making sure those are clear and measurable will ensure that our employees and us as managers are doing what we're supposed to be doing. And here's another thing in my experience that few companies do well is train managers. A lot of people become managers or supervisors because they've been there the longest, or, hey, you're the most senior engineer. Why don't you manage these other engineers? Or, you're the accountant that's been around forever, so we want you to manage a team of accountants. And that doesn't necessarily make sense. So it's important that we're training our managers to manage, and especially in a remote situation, and that training needs to be a priority. We talked about communication, and it's different, but in some ways it's enhanced when dealing with remote teams. There's a lot of good tools that help with this. Some we're familiar with, like WebEx that we're on right now, or Zoom, or Microsoft Teams, or Slack, or the really old-fashioned one, email, instant messaging, things like that. And, I don't have a list of names of tools for you, but there's, a lot of different whiteboards and project management tools and things like that, brainstorming apps. But the communication also needs to address social needs. Since we're not getting together in the office, and we're not spending time, or some people would say wasting time, talking in the break room for an hour, it's important that we do cover some of that social needs, because some people do need that. And so, I mentioned that I have a weekly team meeting, and part of that is to foster collaboration and trust and get to know each other as people, not just as coworkers. Team building is a great thing if you can do it. There are apps that have team building. You can go to Topgolf, which we've done as a group for those of us who are local, but you can also do team building activities online, and there's a lot of apps out there that can help you do that. And so there's a lot of social and collaboration apps, and I'm just going to mention one. There's a lot of them out there. I want to say something about this, and I don't actually, we don't have a subscription to their product. I think it's a subscription base. I don't have any interest in their company. They're not paying me to do this, but I really like their product. Matter of fact, I just set up another demo with them in a few weeks, but it's called Appreciate. And what they do is it's a virtual platform, and in some ways it's kind of like Zoom or Teams or WebEx, but in some ways it's a lot different. And the reason I point them out here is because, and you can either jot this down or screenshot this website, or it's also in the slides that you'll get later, but they've got a lot of free resources related to remote and virtual work, everything from white papers to free webinars, 30 ways to bring fun back to your virtual meeting. And they specialize in this type of thing, and it's a great tool. They show you how to have team building events or sales training events or all hands meetings. So that's another tool. I mentioned about our marketing people saying they want to get together occasionally just because there's that energy in the room that might be difficult to recreate virtually. But when you're collaborating, we really want to allow that space and time for collaboration and schedule that. One of the things we don't get is when we're in the office, we might I can walk into the engineers, or when I worked in manufacturing, I could walk out on the manufacturing floor and talk to some of the supervisors, or talk to the people, the machine operators, or go talk to customer service. Now, because I'm working from home, I have to schedule those kind of calls. And we do that sometimes just so I can say, hey, what do you guys have going on? Is there anything that maybe my team can help you with? And we just want to try to avoid those silos, and remember that collaboration can lead to innovation. We had one where I was talking to another group, and I asked them to send me some information on a spreadsheet, and I helped them redo their spreadsheet to make it a lot cleaner and more efficient, easier to use, and easier to get the information they needed. Technology and security is another challenge that's made even greater with remote work. Most of these probably are common sense, but just as a review, make sure your team members have the proper equipment, monitors, docking stations, headsets. If they need to print something out, do they need to provide their printer to you? Do you have your phones online? Your IT data security, if you've got an IT department, they should be making sure everything's cloud-based. People aren't storing things on their hard drives. Everybody has access to the necessary tools, especially if you got a brand new person. We usually, spend a day or two trying to get everybody access to bank accounts and the ERP system, the CRM and Dropbox and our software and all that, and that everybody has the proper information they need. So I want to jump to productivity, and this is going to kind of come to, when, are people working? A friend of mine was on a team video call a year or so ago, and he told me one of his employees was working on her laptop at her kitchen counter during the meeting, and one of her kids came into the camera view, and she muted herself, spent several minutes helping, doing things, talking to her kids, and then got back on. And that happened several times. So he finally had the conversation about it, that, what is work time and what is allowed when you're working and what is not. So some key things you need to do, I think, with all of your employees, whether they're brand new or existing employees, if you're doing remote work, is set some of those guidelines from working from home. Make sure people have a dedicated workspace. Make sure home-based employees, real important, understand that telecommunication or telecommuting is not a suitable replacement for daycare, unless if they have flexibility on their work hours or something like that. Pets at home, most of the time it's not a big deal, but some people have loud, barky pets. And if they're going to be interacting with customers or team meetings or things like that, it's important that they have some way to deal with their pets. Having expectations in writing is key, because then it's a clear information that they have and a clear policy. If you don't have a written policy regarding working from home that is fair and consistently applied, then that's something I think you should make a priority on. And that would have things like, what are scheduled hours? What hours are people expected to be available? What are the productivity measures, and what are my outcomes going to be based on? Communication guidelines. Are phone calls allowed? How long should it take me if I get an email or if I get a Teams message? How long am I expected to be able to respond to that? What security protocols do we have for working from home? Are there virtual meetings? I've actually been on demos of products where the rep that was doing the demo was on camera and was wearing a t-shirt, which, I don't think presents their company in a very professional manner. Are there any work from home expenses that are going to be reimbursed or not? How do they deal with distractions? And educate your employees. Have a webinar or have a best practices on how you do that. When we first started working remotely a couple of years ago, I had, during my team meetings, we would get together and say, okay, give me 2 things that you do at home that help you be successful at home, or help you be productive, or help you avoid distractions. And people were able to share things that they worked for them and get some ideas. And the big question, are employees working? Well, if we're good managers, we're setting clear expectations, we're using outcome-based productivity measures, we're communicating properly and regularly, and these help assure that our employees are being productive. And so here's my philosophy, unless they're an hourly employee that's required to log their time, I want my people to be putting in the time, but I'm much more concerned with, are they getting their work done? Are we getting stuff done on time? Are we achieving our goals as a department, as individuals? Then are they sitting at a computer from 8 to 5 every day? I've got employees that flex their time, work early in the morning, then get their kids off to school, and then work the rest of the day, and maybe log in the evenings to make up time they miss. And I have no problem with people being flexible as long as they're meeting their expectations. Somebody brought up the location issue. And one of the advantages of remote work is that you're no longer bound by talent that's available in your immediate vicinity, but that comes with additional challenges and requirements. So just a quick list, in which states or countries do you have employees? Does that create nexus for you as a company? And what does that mean? Do you have to register to do business in that state? Do you have to register for sales tax? We actually have to submit a sales tax report in a number of different states, even though we don't sell retail in any of those states, but because we have nexus there, we're required to do that. And each state is different. What employment laws applies? This is huge. If you have employees in different states, you really need to make sure you're following those laws. Everything as it relates to overtime or sick time, it differs from state to state. If you have employees in California particularly, they have a lot more rules and regulations than some other states. So it's very important that you know and understand. And that may involve getting some consultant or an outside PEO or something like that to help you with that. So most of us will likely be in some type of hybrid environment with some or maybe all the employees either working fully remote or in office at least part of the time. So I think being flexible increases employee satisfaction, engagement, and loyalty. But as we talked about, it needs to be based on business need, not just having people come to the office and sit in their own cubicles and offices. Just because we're paying for the space doesn't mean we need to use it if it doesn't make sense. So one of the questions you asked, Robert, was about, what does that look like for space? So if and when we're having employees come in the office, it really needs to be for the actual benefits of being physically together, like getting exposure to other people you might not ordinarily interact with, like some people in other departments. Collaborating, professional development, those are things that you may want to get together in person for. But if we're going to require people to come in the office, it'd be nice if it's an inviting place that they actually want to return to or want to spend time in, that we can take advantage of that time together. Collaborative spaces like meeting rooms. I worked for a company, and every quarter they would have, it was a big company, lots of divisions, you've heard of them, but every quarter they'd have everybody get together during the quarter end process for several days. And they had a great space. People came from all over different offices in the area and outside of the area. And so they had big meeting rooms and small meeting rooms where you could have a meeting with 3 or 4 people and just plug in your laptop and there's a screen there, or one with 20 people or one with 60 people. And they had a great break room that had like booths you could sit down and talk to people one-on-one and things like that. Brainstorming areas, rooms with whiteboards that you can use. Hoteling smaller spaces. So if you don't have everybody coming in at the same time, then maybe having a setup where you have different areas where when you're in the office, you come and plug in. You don't have a dedicated space, but you come in and you can plug in anywhere and use the resources there when you have to be there. One of the big reasons people give for wanting workers back in the office is because of collaboration in the teams. So I agree. I think it can be done very well with online tools, but it's very important to try to foster, trust and collaboration and healthy conflict and things like that that can happen even remotely, even if we're not together. And this may be things like how they communicate, how they work to each other. We've done short little, not big drawn out, expensive personality tests, but we've done short little personality quizzes and then talked about amongst our teams, well, how do you best like to be communicated with? We can coach employees and provide training on communication, effective conflict management, and then integrating new teams in their hybrid work environments is important, and setting up discussions when a new person is in to try to make them feel like a part of the team, discuss working styles, discuss work preferences, discuss communication styles and roles across the group. Having a peer or buddy group for brand new people is a great thing to have somebody connect with them and follow up regularly to make sure that they have an opportunity to ask questions when they might not reach out to you virtually because they just don't want to interrupt you or they don't want to seem stupid, but it's easier just to walk up to somebody in their office. So that can be another great time to get together. And then connecting and communicating should be, personal as well as professional. So getting people together. I have weekly one-on-ones with my team where I don't just, see where they are or status of projects, but say, how are you guys doing? How do you feel today? Is everything going okay? Is there any resources you're missing? Are you having, struggling with anything? And I think my team feels like they can trust me with information and answers to those questions to, in case there's something that I can help with. So just in a nutshell, the remote experience, if you have great employees and you're hired and you're retaining the right employees, you give them meaningful work that they feel a part of, that they feel they're contributing. You have strong caring management that understands how to manage. You have a positive and hopefully fun workplace. I know Robert and I are both fun guys. I like to have a little bit of fun as well as your work. We spend a lot of time working, so it's nice to do that with a good team that you can have fun with. And then also making sure that people are taking care of themselves and employee well-being is a priority. And then that really equals success. So I just want to, kind of close with, the office as we know it is over. It's changed. And, I think there's a handful of people. There seems to be this, I've read some articles recently about the back to work thing. Elon Musk just announced not too long ago that everybody had to come back to the office or he would consider them resigning. When they did, they didn't have enough parking spaces. They didn't have enough desks. Their Wi-Fi went haywire. So it just wasn't necessarily a great thing. I'd also encourage you, I don't have a link to it, but I can send that to you, Robert. But Apple did something very similar. They're requiring a lot of employees, not all, but a lot of them to come back into the office based on proximity. And they got together, a bunch of employees, and wrote this really interesting letter that kind of outlines a lot of the reasons why the employees didn't think it was a great idea. And it's a really good read. It's short, but I would check that out. And you could probably just Google, Apple employee letter back to work or something like that and find that. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I'd also just real quick, just encourage everybody, hook up with me on LinkedIn. I'll post occasional articles or little quick tips or things like that, or just connect. And it'd be great to talk to more of you.
David, I'm going to hit you rapid fire with a bunch of questions. And I'm going to try to hit you, I'm going to start with some counterpoints, okay? Because we've been flying the remote flag here for a little bit. So some of these are for me, just to counterpoint you here. Number one, there's a loss of work-life balance if you're remote. Your employees might be working too much, can't separate. What do you say to that?
I agree. It can be. I think we have to be careful, and we have to keep our eyes on our employees and make sure they're not doing that. That's one of the reasons those weekly check-ins are so important. And I'll ask my people, are you working a lot? If I see them I've told my people when they're on vacation, do not email me, do not text me, do not answer my emails on, the weekend. If it's necessary, I've got everybody's text number. I'll text you, but I'll actually get on my staff's case if I see them working when they shouldn't be working. So I think that's important. Again, a lot of this really comes back to, and the more I've talked about it, and the more I've written about it, the more I've thought about it, it really comes back to being good managers. Is we need to not just make sure our employees are doing their jobs, getting the work done, but we need to make sure they're taking care of themselves so that they stick around.
David, not everybody can work remote, so it's not fair.
That is so true. Not everybody you mean can't or isn't allowed to? I assume you mean isn't allowed to?
Both. So it's not fair. So everybody should come in.
Yeah, I think hopefully that's not the head of the company that's making them come in, although that does happen. I think we as employees need to be able to prove and give ask for the opportunity to demonstrate how we can be effective doing that. I also think if we're implementing a policy that it has to be, it's not fair if somebody lives 2 hours away, they don't have to come in, but if I work a half hour away, I do. So it does need to be, that's why written policies are important, because it does need to be spelled out and implemented uniformly and fairly and consistently.
Serious note, just if the average worker works okay, there are below average workers everywhere, and even some of the places we work. And those people don't work in the office. They definitely don't work at home. I mean, we've all worked at places where people tried very hard not to work. I almost wish they put that effort into working. So there is some validity to, hey, if these people are working remote, I got 1,000 people under my team, like some percentage of them are not working, and it's going to be even more remote. There is some truth there. So how do you, without being weird or an overlord or overstepping, how do you make sure people are actually working?
Well, first of all, I hope you don't have 1,000 direct reports, because you can't manage 1,000 people. I think we need to train people on how to manage. I think people need to be in touch with their employees. Another good suggestion is, with that cross training and collaboration, things like that, is maybe it's time to say, hey, why don't you guys train each other on each other's jobs? And we'll see, oh, wait, that job's only taking 2 hours. It's not taking 2 days. So you may get some information there. And I think as managers, I don't think we have to know everything that every one of our employees does, but I think it's important that we kind of have a understanding of who works for us, what their jobs are, what that entails. And we're always looking at ways to become more efficient. So maybe those people that are only working, 10 hours a week are just super efficient. Maybe they need to train everybody else.
There's no right answer to this, but I just want to ask you a difficult question. Workers' comp and remote is a nightmare. And you and we asked this question. I think I asked this question during your presentation. Somebody trips on their kid's toy or their dog in the performance of actual work. That's workers' comp. And so that's a nightmare. Ergonomics, workers' comp is already a nightmare in some states. Determining where the accident happened, nightmare. Talk about workers' comp and some and as it pertains to remote, hybrid, etc.
That's one of the best arguments that I know for return to the office, actually, because it is a big unknown. I have done some reading on it since the last webinar where that question came up. Thank you very much. I've done a little more research, and there's still a lot of cases out there that talk about that. And some people are winning those, some are losing those. That I'm not an expert on that. I'm not a legal person. So that's definitely something that, again, you need to talk to legal counsel about, or if you have a PEO, they can probably coach you on that. I do know that we have workers' comp in all the states we have employees. I don't know that we've had any claims on those in the last 2 years. I don't believe we have, but I haven't had that personally happen, but I know they're out there and we do need to be careful. And that then begs the question. It's like, okay, show me, take your camera and show me around your room. Oh, is that a kid's toy? Well, that can't be in your office. You need to take that out of there so you don't actually step on it, that type of thing. So I don't have a great answer, but that's a good argument for, if that's a big concern or if it starts happening a lot, that's one of those arguments for maybe we need to be back in the office.
Confidentiality. You're an HR leader. You got remote human resources professionals talking about things. They might have headphones on, like I do right now, but people in the house can hear what they're saying. Accounting has payroll information. Somebody might kind of look at the corner of their eye. Talk about confidentiality and remote workers. There's a potential issue there.
Yeah, that's great. We're small. I have one accounting person, one HR person, and she and I've actually talked about that. So we understand that there's certain things that, we can't talk about. She and I are some of the few people in our building that actually have offices with doors that close. There's a lot of people that when they come in, they're in cubicles, but because of the nature of some of those things, we have, doors that we can lock and have those conversations. Sometimes those conversations need to be up front. We need to make sure that those are going to be confidential. And that's a training thing. We need to make sure they're doing that. Also on the data side, we need to make sure, back to the IT issues, that our data is secure. And, if we have an IT person or department or consultant, they can help us make sure that our data is secure and that, people aren't sharing data that they shouldn't be or don't have access to data that they shouldn't be.
Do you think is this a foregone conclusion that hybrid, flex, remote, whatever percentage it is now is going to stay that percentage or grow? Or are we going back to 2018?
I don't think we're ever going to go back to everybody being in the office all the time. I think even before COVID, some of my previous jobs, I worked remote 1 or 2 days a week, mainly because of big commutes or just, it just made it easier, or it was a perk. A benefit of being there is, hey, you can work from home on Fridays, so you don't have to do that Friday after work commute every day or every week. So I don't think it's going to go back. I think we're going to realize some type of equilibrium. And to your earlier question, different jobs require different kind of situations depending on the job. Some may require more in work. We've got some of our people in our engineering department that we're requiring to be local, and some that don't have to be local, depending on their work. We have a lot of equipment here, a lot of testing things. So if they're a hardware engineer, they probably have to be able to come in the office at least sometimes. If they're a software engineer, maybe not. Maybe they never have to even see one of these people because most of what they're doing is online. So to answer your question, I don't think we're going to go back the way it was, but I think there needs to be a hybrid. Having said that, for the record, since this is going to be on YouTube, my boss will probably see it. I'm not looking for another job, but I get calls from recruiters and emails all the time for fully remote positions in finance. So there's a lot of positions out there. So that's one of the things we have to weigh is, can we find, the right people locally, if that's what we decide to do, or do we need to have a remote or some type of hybrid situation?
David, have you read or do you know of any difference between private and public sector? Seems to be, from the comment section, the public sector, government, maybe state, local, federal, a bigger push for everyone to come back all the time. Any knowledge or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you to some extent. I've read that the government actually is requiring more people to come into different offices. They're actually one of the only sectors last month that lost employees instead of gained employees and are actually losing jobs. I had to call into the IRS over the last couple of weeks for something, and I was either put on hold for, they said my hold time would be 60 to 90 minutes, or a few times I called and they said, due to high call volume, we can't take your call back another time. And I couldn't even stay on hold. So Yeah, I think there is a push. I see it more in government than public. What I've seen in public or versus private is pretty mixed. It really depends on upper management. There's big companies, international companies that already deal with, they have plants in different areas and different people in different locations and a headquarters here and satellites here. So they've been working, even though they've been in offices, they've been in different offices. And this really isn't a whole lot different than that. So I think that's going to continue.
I got a bunch of questions that I'm not going to get to. I'll give you the last one. Is when we were talking about locations and some of the tracking and compliance problems. David, you heard of anybody limiting where remote employees can work, or best practices in reporting so you know where employees are working? Any maybe software tools to make this easier for us all?
We require people to tell us where they are. I mean, that's part of their HR record and where their checks are and their banks are and where we're going to send their W-2s, even though they're electronic. But, so we need to know if we hire a new person or if somebody moves. And we had that happen during COVID where we had a few people move and it's like, oh, wait a minute, you live where now? Because they had to change their address in their 401k or something like that. So it's important to know where they are. I can see companies saying that, we will accept people in the tri-state area, or we'll accept people that are, within 4 hours of an office. So if we have a company meeting, they could come in or something like that. I don't know of anybody saying we're only going to hire people from these. Well, I take that back. I have seen remote jobs advertised where they have, person must be based at one of these 3 locations, even though it's a hybrid situation, because they're close to one of their main offices. So I don't know if I fully answered that question, but, I've kind of seen it as a mixed bag right now. I don't see it going one way or the other.
Perfect. We're right at time, David. This was awesome. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. Great intel on recruiting tools, collaboration tools. I'm going to send out David's deck to everybody for resources and a link to David's LinkedIn profile. And David, I thank you very much. Awesome job.
Thanks so much for having me, Robert. I appreciate it. This was great.